The guests whispered behind their hands as the 60-year-old billionaire stood at the altar beside his maid. Some called her a gold digger. Others laughed, convinced she had trapped a lonely old man for his fortune. But when the wedding ceremony ended, the bride stepped forward, took the microphone, and revealed a secret she had hidden for 25 years. Within seconds, the ballroom fell silent. Tears filled eyes. And the billionaire himself could barely stand after hearing the truth that at 60 years old, billionaire Richard Harrison owned luxury hotels, private jets, and mansions across the country. Yet despite his wealth, he lived alone inside a huge estate that felt colder every year. His wife had passed away long ago, and his only daughter had died in a tragic accident decades earlier. Every evening, Richard wandered through empty halls, surrounded by expensive possessions but haunted by loneliness and memories he could never escape. Among the household staff was a quiet maid named Grace. At 38, she worked harder than anyone else in the mansion. She arrived before sunrise and often stayed late into the evening. Unlike others, she never treated Richard differently because of his wealth. She spoke kindly, listened carefully, and showed genuine respect. Over time, Richard found himself looking forward to their conversations more than any business meeting or social gathering. Grace had her own painful history. Years earlier, she had lost her husband to illness and struggled to raise her young son alone. Life had forced her to accept difficult jobs just to survive. She never complained about her hardships. Instead, she carried herself with quiet dignity. Her strength impressed Richard deeply because she never sought sympathy. She simply faced every challenge with courage and determination, no matter how difficult life became. One rainy evening, Richard noticed Grace staring at an old family photograph displayed in the library. The picture showed Richard, his late wife, and their little daughter smiling together. Grace looked emotional but quickly turned away when she realized he was watching. Richard wondered why the image affected her so strongly. Before he could ask, she apologized and returned to work, leaving him puzzled by the sadness he saw in her eyes. As months passed, their friendship grew stronger. They shared stories during quiet afternoons and discussed dreams, regrets, and family memories. Richard discovered that Grace possessed wisdom and kindness far beyond anything money could buy. For the first time in years, laughter returned to his life. The mansion felt alive again. Staff members noticed the positive change and were surprised by the happiness that seemed to surround both Richard and Grace. Rumors soon began spreading among employees and business associates. Some mocked Richard for spending so much time with a maid. Others suggested Grace had secret motives. Neither of them paid attention. They understood that people often judged situations without knowing the truth. Despite the gossip, their bond continued to deepen. What began as friendship slowly transformed into something neither expected: genuine love built on trust, understanding, and shared loneliness. One afternoon, Richard invited Grace to walk through the gardens. The flowers were blooming beautifully beneath the warm sunlight. As they sat beside a fountain, Richard spoke honestly about his fears. He admitted that growing older frightened him. More than death, he feared spending the rest of his life alone. Grace listened quietly, understanding every word because she knew loneliness better than most people ever would. That evening, Grace returned home and thought deeply about Richard's confession. She cared for him more than she wanted to admit. Yet she worried about how society would react. The difference in their ages, backgrounds, and financial status would attract criticism. She knew people would assume the worst. Still, when she remembered Richard's kindness and sincerity, she realized her feelings were real and impossible to ignore. Weeks later, Richard made a decision. He invited Grace to dinner in a private dining room overlooking the city skyline. With trembling hands, he presented a simple ring and asked her to marry him. Grace was shocked. Tears filled her eyes. She never imagined such a moment. After a long silence, she smiled gently and accepted, believing that true love mattered more than public opinion or social expectations. News of the engagement spread quickly. Newspapers, television programs, and social media exploded with reactions. Many people criticized the relationship. Some accused Grace of chasing wealth. Others claimed Richard had lost his judgment. The headlines were cruel and relentless. Yet neither of them responded publicly. They chose silence over arguments. Their focus remained on each other rather than strangers who knew nothing about the reality of their relationship. Richard's business partners were especially concerned. Several approached him privately and warned that the marriage could damage his reputation. They suggested he reconsider before it was too late. Richard listened respectfully but remained firm. For years, those same people had watched him suffer through loneliness without offering comfort. Now that he had found happiness, he refused to let anyone take it away. His decision was final. That Grace's son, Daniel, initially struggled with the engagement. He worried that his mother would face endless judgment. More importantly, he feared she might get hurt emotionally. After meeting Richard several times, however, Daniel began to understand. He saw genuine affection in Richard's eyes. He realized this relationship was not based on money but on mutual respect and care. Gradually, his doubts disappeared. The wedding day arrived at a magnificent ballroom decorated with white roses and golden lights. Hundreds of guests attended, including celebrities, politicians, and business leaders. While many smiled politely, whispers filled the room. Curious eyes followed Grace everywhere she went. She remained calm despite the pressure. Deep inside, she carried a secret she had protected for decades. Soon, everyone would finally learn the truth. Richard stood proudly beside Grace during the ceremony. As they exchanged vows, emotion overwhelmed him. He never thought he would experience love again after losing his first wife. Looking into Grace's eyes, he felt grateful for the second chance life had unexpectedly given him. The guests applauded as they were officially declared husband and wife. The celebration began, but the biggest surprise was still waiting. After dinner, Grace quietly requested the microphone. Guests expected a simple thank you speech. Instead, she stood before the crowd with tears forming in her eyes. Richard looked confused but supportive. The room gradually fell silent. Every conversation stopped. Every camera turned toward her. Taking a deep breath, Grace prepared to reveal a truth she had hidden for 25 years, even from Richard himself. Grace began by sharing a story from her youth. 25 years earlier, she had worked as a nurse at a local hospital. One evening, a terrible car accident brought several victims into the emergency room. Among them was a young couple and their little daughter. The situation was chaotic. Doctors fought desperately to save lives. Grace remembered every detail because that night changed her future forever. The young couple were Richard's wife and daughter. Grace explained that after the accident, confusion and panic filled the hospital. During the emergency response, Richard's daughter was mistakenly reported dead. Heartbroken families were informed of the tragedy. But the truth was far more complicated. The child had survived. Due to an administrative error and unusual circumstances, she was separated from her family before anyone realized it. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Richard stared at Grace, unable to understand where the story was leading. His hands began shaking. Guests exchanged nervous glances. The atmosphere changed instantly from celebration to disbelief. Grace paused briefly, fighting back tears. Then she continued speaking, knowing there was no turning back. The secret she had carried for decades was finally about to be revealed completely. Grace explained that the surviving child had been transferred to another facility. Before the mistake could be corrected, a series of legal complications occurred. Records were lost. Communication failed. Eventually, the child entered foster care. Grace discovered the truth while working at the hospital but lacked the resources and authority to fix the situation. By the time she tried, the trail had already gone cold. For years, Grace searched quietly for information. She visited agencies, reviewed records, and followed every possible lead. She never forgot the little girl whose life had been altered by one terrible mistake. Eventually, Grace located her. The child had grown into a young woman living under a different identity. Sadly, years of hardship had shaped her life in ways nobody could have imagined. The guests listened in complete silence. Richard's face had become pale. Tears streamed down his cheeks. Every memory of losing his daughter returned with painful intensity. Part of him wanted to believe Grace's story. Another part feared disappointment. He had spent decades mourning someone he believed was gone forever. The possibility that she had survived seemed almost impossible to comprehend. Grace then revealed why she entered Richard's life. Years earlier, she learned that the grieving father from the accident was billionaire Richard Harrison. After discovering this connection, she applied for work at his estate. She wanted to learn more and confirm the facts before telling him. She could not risk giving false hope. The truth was too important and too fragile for mistakes. As she spent time with Richard, Grace witnessed his loneliness firsthand. She saw the pain hidden behind his success and wealth. She also discovered a kind-hearted man who treated employees with respect. Over time, her original mission became complicated by unexpected emotions. She genuinely fell in love with him. What began as a search for truth transformed into a relationship neither planned. The room remained frozen as Grace signaled toward the entrance. Slowly, a young woman stepped inside the ballroom. She looked nervous but determined. The crowd turned to watch. Richard's heart raced uncontrollably. Something about her face felt familiar. The shape of her eyes resembled his late wife's. Memories he thought were buried forever suddenly flooded back with overwhelming force. The young woman approached the stage and stood beside Grace. Fighting tears, Grace introduced her as Emily. She explained that extensive DNA testing had confirmed the truth. Emily was Richard's biological daughter. The evidence was undeniable. Lawyers, investigators, and medical experts had verified every detail. Grace had spent years gathering proof because she wanted absolute certainty before sharing such life-changing news. Richard collapsed into a chair, overcome by emotion. The ballroom erupted into tears. Guests who once judged the marriage now watched in stunned silence. Emily approached carefully and knelt beside her father. For a moment, neither spoke. Words seemed too small for such an extraordinary reunion. Then Richard reached out, touched her face gently, and began crying like a child. Emily embraced him tightly. Decades of separation disappeared within seconds. Father and daughter held each other while the crowd watched through tears. Richard apologized repeatedly for not finding her sooner. Emily assured him it was never his fault. Both understood they were victims of circumstances beyond their control. What mattered now was that they finally had a chance to build the relationship fate had stolen. Richard then turned toward Grace. Through tears, he thanked her for changing his life. She had not married him for money. She had spent years searching for his lost daughter and protecting a truth that could heal his broken heart. Her dedication, patience, and compassion had reunited a family. The guests who once doubted her intentions now felt ashamed of their assumptions. By the end of the evening, the ballroom felt transformed. What began as a controversial wedding had become a powerful story of love, forgiveness, and hope. Reporters who expected scandal witnessed something far more meaningful. Families hugged one another. Even hardened business executives wiped away tears. Everyone understood they had experienced a moment they would remember for the rest of their lives. Months later, Richard, Grace, Emily, and Daniel gathered for a family photograph in the mansion garden. Laughter filled the air. The home that once felt empty now overflowed with warmth and love. Richard finally understood that true wealth was never measured by money. It was measured by the people who stand beside you. And thanks to Grace, he had regained the family he thought he lost forever. The end. Red Heart.